Okay, welcome to week 5 of Do You Think Christianly? We're on our journey of the exploration of the Christian worldview. Because the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all its people belong to Him. We've been going along through these learning goals. The first week we went through the introduction to worldviews, and then we went into a description of the major worldviews in weeks 2 and 3. Then the last time we were together, we looked at the Bible as our source. And these videos are available on the Quincy Free Methodist Church YouTube page if anybody missed those and would like to look at those. So today, though, we're going to finally get to walking our way through the Christian worldview. And as we go, we're going to compare and contrast it with these other worldviews. We want to look at ways we can articulate ideas in light of the Christian worldview. And ultimately, we want to be able to apply that to our world and the things we face. So there's these references that I've been using, and then today we're going to talk about creation, so there's some different websites that's kind of their ministry. So the first week we went through the fact that everyone has a worldview, and that worldview determines their values and behaviors, and that as Christians we should have a Christian worldview. We looked at these other worldviews. Naturalism has the view that there's really only the space-time continuum, the natural world that exists, and that everything within that came about by natural processes. And then there's the transcendental religions, where there's this idea of this universal one. Everything belongs to that one, is part of it, and emanates from it. And we talked about the major theistic religions now, which would be Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Now, we're not making the point that they're the same. There's some differences, and we'll talk about those. But they do have some commonality, that there is a God who's the creator, who's the final authority, and our destination is either with or without that God. And then we talked at great lengths about Post-Modernism and how it really jettisons the idea that there's any truth, that a person's truth begins to be defined by their experience or their personal narratives. And it really values tolerance and inclusiveness above other things. So last time, as we went through issues surrounding the Bible, we looked at how the Old Testament was the Jewish scriptures, and that's how it came, as via Judaism, because Christianity came out of that. And we talked about the Septuagint. The importance was a Greek translation of the Jewish scriptures that came about a couple hundred years before Jesus, and it really was the Bible of the early church and the apostles and Jesus. And then we talked about how we got the New Testament. The New Testament is comprised of eyewitness accounts, and there was a strict criteria for including books into the New Testament. They had to be apostolic, they had to be early, and they had to be universally accepted. And we really looked at the early church fathers quoted and mentioned and listed some of these books from very, very early on. We looked at manuscript evidence, that there's a wide variety of manuscripts out there that came through different pathways that we can compare to see how much they agree. And that we really have some very, very old fragments. And the one we had a picture of was from AD 130, which was a long time ago. So we're still continuing to ask this question. If I'm going to think Christianly, I must know what Christianity is. So there's really a view of reality that Christianity would claim, and that is that reality is knowable, that things are true if they conform to this reality. So we don't view faith as being wishful thinking, that somehow we create reality through our belief system. But our belief or our faith is acceptance and trust in what is true or what conforms to reality, that Christianity is true and real, and therefore we put our faith in, or we trust in, Jesus. And since it's real, it doesn't belong just in private spaces, but it explains and informs everything. It's just really the foundation where we put our feet. But also is this view of God, that foundational is that He's a personal being involved in our world. and that he's transcendent, which means he's outside our space-time continuum. He's immanent, which means he acts within our world or within our sphere. He's triune, Father, Son, and Spirit. He's sovereign, all-powerful, all-knowing. And then there's a list of character traits, which this is not exhaustive. Righteous, holy, just, loving, merciful, faithful. Really, as we see here in Psalm 100, verse 5, for the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. But if we were to compare that to the view of God in these other worldviews, naturalism, there is no God exists. In transcendentalism, everything is one, and everything is part of that or emanates from that. Judaism does not view the Trinity. They don't accept Jesus as the Messiah. And Islam also has a single divine God who is also transcendent, sovereign, and all-powerful. In Christianity, we have Father, Son, and Spirit. And Post-Modernism kind of depends. Either they're atheists or they wouldn't consider it to even be able to know who or what God is. But we're always sort of confronted with this question then, and especially I think when we talk about the theistic religions, do all paths lead to God? Because all those kind of ecumenical people out there, they say, well, you all really believe the same thing. But it's really, we've looked at how they really don't believe the same thing, so they really conflict in how they do, and can they be true if they all conflict? And so, is Christianity intolerant and exclusive? But we've compared the foundation of all these, and we've found that they differ in terms of how they view reality, how they view where we come from, how they view even what the nature of the world is, how they view what the human person is, and God. And so they really can't all be true. Now, they could all be wrong, but they can't all be true. But really, this is what we're confronted with, I think, more than anything else, is this split that we have with Islam. And aren't we all really, really the same? So I like to use this. So there's two squares here. One's red and one's not red. Now, they can't be the same and be red and not red simultaneously. And so just like a square can't be both red and not red at the same time, Jesus cannot be both God and not God. So Islam and Christianity, they don't agree. But Christianity, ultimately, we want to just explain this. Who is God? What is the grand narrative of the world? And then, in light of that, how am I to respond? So this is the Christian worldview, the grand narrative of creation. We were created by God. Something went terribly wrong in the fall that needed to be fixed, and so a Redeemer was sent. And there's ultimately a partial restoration here and an ultimate restoration that will take place. So this is the pathway that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about these step by step by step. So the first thing then we're going to talk about today is creation. This is the first television picture from space in 1960. And then this is the first color image that came back from the moon. And this is how we tend to see ourselves. But this is a really new phenomenon. And I think when we began to see these pictures, it changed a lot about how we viewed our world and each other. But a person's view of their origins shapes their entire foundation, the entire foundation of their thinking, because it really answers the question, where did everything come from? Who am I? What does it mean to be human? Why am I here? How am I made? Why I'm made? And then how am I to live? And ultimately where I'm going, what happens to me when I die? So the Christian view is that God created everything. Naturalism, we talked about, the universe was sort of self-creating, only came about through natural processes. In transcendentalism, it really is part of and emanates kind of out of God. And Judaism has the same view that Christianity has, right? Because Christianity comes out of that, and we have the same Old Testament scriptures. Islam has a creation story by God, and then Post-Modernism, we still have the same thing. It depends on whether you're atheist or not, whether it's naturalism or whether it's really unknowable. Now, we're kind of going to zoom through creation, and we could spend 12 weeks, we could spend a year talking about it, and we kind of need to acknowledge that there's that there's a lot of conversations around the specifics of what happened, and we kind of have these major Christian views of we have the young Earth view, we have an old Earth view. There's theistic evolution, and then the intelligent design, which kind of overlaps all those things. And we could spend, a lot of times talking, and we can do that at a later date if we want to. It would be a lot of fun. But regardless of that, this idea that God's the creator, it's been, it's in the scriptures, but it's also been part of our creeds for a long time. Go back to the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is, seen and unseen. And then the Apostles' Creed that we're familiar with, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. So what is the Bible? I mean, what does it have to say? And it might be that, when we use it, that we kind of want to use it to prove the existence of God. And I don't know, I mean, we're going to talk about Big Bang cosmology and stuff, but really the Bible really declares God as the creator. And pick a version, right? Pick a version. They all say the same thing, The only difference I found was the King James didn't have the S on heavens. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And when they talk about this heavens and earth, we need to understand that that's kind of a term that describes not two things, but the totality of everything. And despite these discussions that we might have about some of the specifics, the Bible's clear that God created, and it uses this term bara, which is really only used to describe the acts of God. And so there always comes up this question then, is Genesis history? And you see that, I don't know, if you see it on your Facebook feed, I see it on mine. And so we consider Genesis to be true, that it's not just an ancient Near Eastern creation myth, which is kind of one of the theories that was meant to sort of combat thinking at the time. But while we think it's true, we really need to understand that modern histories are really different than kind of these ancient accounts, because we have detail after detail of time and place, and we have all these stories and stuff that it doesn't really function the way modern histories do, and we can't try to cram it into that box. We have to let it say what it says. And so it comes to the same question: how does it deal with science? Is it a science textbook? Well, once again, we consider it to be true and not an ancient Near Eastern creation myth, but its purpose is really not to give you the details of the science. And so once again, we might like it to have a lot of detail, but it doesn't. It has what it has, and that's what we will. But this is kind of my opinion. We're all worried about these creations accounts, and we think, well, it tells us what, and that's not untrue. There is a what in there, but I really think that the creation account is about who. And the heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims the work of his hands. Day after day they pour out speech. Night after night they communicate knowledge. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. So, what does the Bible reveal that we could sort of stand on? Well, the Bible declares that the universe has had a beginning, and this is a conversation that's out there, because if the universe had a beginning, then there's something that had to cause that beginning, because if we live in linear time, then something happens, and something happens as a consequence, and as a consequence. And Big Bang cosmology is widely accepted by everybody, and so it raises this question: if there was a Big Bang, what started that? And it's because that beginner, that first cause had to be outside of that creation. And we would view God as that transcendent beginner, that he is outside the space-time continuum and is that first cause of all that we know is tangible in our world. So there's this idea that our claim that the universe was created ex nihilo, which means from nothing, that God didn't really use previously existing material or make it out of himself. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. So we would say God spoke the world into existence, and we see this in Genesis, God said, let there be, and it was so, and it was good. And you see that in all these days in creation, and here's day one, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw that the light was good. We also, now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So we see the Spirit of God there. And we also know that that Jesus was the creator. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And we also have this verse that in Colossians that says the same things. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So the Genesis account tells the story of the world being created in 6 days, or the word yom, which is a
24-hour day.
It can be used either as the daylight hours, a 24-hour day, or a longer but finite period of time. So it's used different ways and that's part of that really long conversation that we don't have time to have today. We're just zooming through everything, but that there's these 6 creation events that happened, and that's how it. So day one, we have God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening and there was morning the first day.
Isn't that interesting, though, that there was no sun, but there was light?
Part of that long conversation, yeah. Day one, we have light and day, or light and dark, day and night, right?
What did that look like before light and dark were separated?
Yeah.
It was just all dark. Absence of light is dark.
Right.
Day two, and God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. So day two, we have this water separation, or this kind of ordering where the water goes where it's supposed to be. Day three, God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas, and God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning the third day. So day three, we see the appearance of dry ground, the water, the continents are formed. The water and the dry ground are separated. We see the earth sprouting vegetation. In day four, God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heaven to give light to the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. So day 4, we see the celestial bodies appear, sun, moon, and stars. They're a source of light for the day and night, and they're to mark the time, the days, the seasons, and the years. Then day 5, God said, let the water swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth and across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 5th day. So day 5, we see the skies filled with birds, and we see the water filled with the fish and the other sea creatures. And then day 6, God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, and you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. So the 6th day, there's just a ton going on, right? There's, there's all these land animals are created. Adam and Eve are created. Adam has to name all the animals. And there's this, a thing that we call the cultural mandate. We're going to talk about humans next week and the Imago Dei and what all that means. So there's just a lot packed in there that we'll talk about next week. And then comes the 7th day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. So we see God resting from his special creative acts. And we really see this pattern of forming and filling, right? In day 1, we have light, and then in day 4, it's filled with the celestial bodies. In day 2, we have the water kind of being separated, and it's filled then with fish and with birds. And in day 3, we see the land form, and then filled with humans and animals. But aside from this first account, which is where we spend really all of our time when we talk about creation, right? We really spend it in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, but it is everywhere in the Bible. There's references all through the Old Testament, and there's a lot more than, a lot of times they speak of God as the creator and the earth as his creation, right? But there also are, like when you're in Job, there's tons of stuff in Job about how the world was put together and the things that God did. It's everywhere in the Old Testament. But it also, we see it in the New Testament. And we see it in this verse in Romans that we've already gone through, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who's blessed forever. Amen. And in Ephesians, and to bring light to everyone what is the plan of the mystery hidden for ages in God, who created all things. And once again, there's this verse in Colossians about Jesus being the creator. He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. But not only it's God outside and creating everything. But we also see this continual stories of him being inside of our creation and still having power and influence and the ability to sort of physically intervene in creation. And the Bible has tons of references about God performing all these miraculous events where he intervenes. And there's just kind of a fast list. He intervenes in the garden, he intervenes with the flood, he intervenes all over with Abraham, right? He calls him out, Isaac is conceived, there's all the things in Sodom and Gomorrah. Joseph has all these dreams. They go to Egypt to survive the famine. Then when they come out, there's miraculous events, one right after the other. There's the plagues, and the Red Sea, and the water from the rock, and the manna from heaven. All these things that happen in the desert. When they're entering the land, God intervenes to give them victory. Israel has this continued God's intervention in their history. We have God intervening in the Incarnation. Jesus performs miracle after miracle after miracle. And his resurrection would be the prime, the Incarnation, the resurrection, these primary interventions that happened on our behalf. We have the apostles performing miracles, and then there's a lot of things that are still to come that the Bible predicts. But then you have these people that say, well, just give me Jesus. I don't, all that other stuff, I don't know if I really believe it. Just give me Jesus. So I'm just going to give you Jesus. So once again, this is what they say. John was one of his closest associates, and John says the world was created through him. And we see Jesus referring to the world as being created. And Mark, for in those days there will be such tribulation as not been from the beginning of creation that God created until now. So Jesus is confirming God is the creator. And God expects us and holds us accountable to recognize him as the creator, and thus that we belong to him. Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. But our biggest challenge that we encounter is in naturalism. And once again, this is part of a huge discussion when we look at everybody really has to kind of answer the same questions. And there kind of is this idea that there's this accusation of gaps. So the naturalists will say, well, you just believe in a God of the gaps. And I would say, well, you just believe in an evolution of the gaps, right? Okay, and so, we hear that, we kind of get all, a little huffy about it. But I really just think that this really describes the point I'm trying to make, is that your worldview is how you fill in all those assumptions. It's how you fill in the gaps. And so we shouldn't be surprised that people are filling in their gaps from their worldview. What we really have to find is what has the most explanatory power, because everybody has to answer the same questions, right? So when people say, well, what about the problem with evil? Well, yeah, we have to answer that. But so do all other worldviews. Everybody has to answer the same questions. And so we really just need to be honest and recognize that we do kind of have these assumptions. One of the problems we really have is that we've really confused the discipline of science, the idea that we can discover our world through investigation, with really that has to create our whole worldview. And as a consequence, we've really only, because we've extrapolated science to mean naturalism, that's the only thing that will allow to speak to reality. And then thus they get relegated to different spheres. Science, there's a reality that science over here, and you guys can talk about belief and morality over in this sphere. The problem with that is that if we only think that naturalism is true, then if what we believe is not true, then we can jettison the morality too, right? We arrive at a point where the religion is untrue, therefore the subsequent morality is irrelevant or wrong or immoral. And we're really at this clash with naturalism that, we'll tolerate religion, but only if it takes place in private spaces. And you'll hear that when they talk about kind of in the public square about having the right to worship as opposed to having the right to practice your religion. But it really is relegated to, they're trying to want it removed from the public discourse that really is wishful thinking for the feeble-minded. And we've concluded that it's not only wrong, but that it's dangerous. But, naturalism, it's kind of in its own crisis. We talk about Christianity being in crisis, but naturalism is in its own crisis because really of its inability to answer these big, tough questions. Where did the universe come from? And they're postulated some reasons how you could have this beginning. But their explanatory power, people would have a different opinion about that. But there are also this struggle over the origin of life that they have to answer, and their naturalism is struggling to find these first causes for both of those things. And there's issues surrounding living organisms that they haven't, that they're struggling to answer. Really, this origin of life, and so while we had this idea that there's this primordial soup, and then if you had these compounds, and if you could interject energy into it, then you could form amino acids, they would form life. And the problem is that hasn't really panned out, that really existed. And so it's driven them to say, well, maybe it came from outer space. We also had this really challenged by these ideas of how chemical compounds, they naturally occur when you undergo chemical reactions. And really, how do they need to occur in order for life forms to be able to use them? So questions about DNA, where, information should have a source, where did it come from? There's just limits to biological mutations, even when we've tried to do that. I mean, we can mutate dogs to be either a Chihuahua or a Great Dane, but we haven't been able to do is make it a cat. And this idea of irreducible complexity, and the classic example of that is the mousetrap. If you say, well, things have to, you go from this stage to this stage to this stage, and increasingly those stages give you a better chance of survival. The problem is kind of these intermediary stages, they're not functional, and if they're not functional, then how can they be an advantage? But once again, this is part of this really, really long conversation about, there's books and books and books written on this, and we're just kind of breathing through it. But, I think there's also this idea kind of about where did life come from, that the earth is really a Goldilocks place, and there's just an increasing amount of work done to where it's just a rare space. And we thought, well, if we were just third rock from the sun and we had plenty of water, but the list of what's required for advanced life is very, 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 very long. So once again, that's kind of, we just breeze through that, right? But we want to be like the wise man that built his house on the rock. And we need to be more than hearers of the word. We need to be doers of the word. And so, and in the Great Commission, we're called to make disciples and to call people to follow Christ, and that's the call on our life. So we need to just give some thought then, if all this is true, what does that mean for me? And like I said, next week when we talk about what it means to be human in the Imago Dei, we will do that. But the Gloria Patri, it's an old doxology liturgy, and I just thought we could all read this together. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Amen. Okay, next week, the Imago Dei, we are created in His image, and that changes everything. And here's our red pen logic for today. We need Jesus and science.